What if the world we know is just the surface of a deeper reality, one composed not of matter alone, but of dimensions we were never taught to perceive? In 1972, inside the concrete walls of a U.S. intelligence facility, a quiet revolution began. It wasn't a new weapon or a new code. It was something far more radical, a doorway into a place where the mind could leave the body. The project was called Stargate, and its objective was simple: train operatives to project their awareness into what they called the astral dimension, not imagination, not metaphor. A literal parallel layer of existence, overlaying our own, accessible through consciousness alone. Within weeks, ordinary individuals, scientists, soldiers, analysts, were learning to detach their awareness from the physical world. With guided protocols rooted in meditation and altered brain states, they were navigating this hidden dimension to observe distant places in real time. No cameras, no satellites, just the mind, floating invisibly into secure buildings, watching, recording. The results were hard to dismiss. Agents described secret submarine construction sites they had never seen. They located missing persons, detailed internal layouts of enemy compounds, even read documents from thousands of miles away. And most hauntingly, they sometimes saw the past, sometimes the future. Brain scans confirmed what the experience seemed to show. During these sessions, the mind entered a profoundly altered state. Theta waves synchronized across the hemispheres, patterns never seen in waking life. And when the sessions ended, the data proved accurate more often than chance could explain. This wasn't just a psychic trick. It was a new kind of intelligence work, one that bypassed the physical altogether. But the implications rippled far beyond espionage. If consciousness could observe without eyes, travel without movement, and perceive beyond time, what did that say about what we are, about what reality is? By 1995, Project Stargate was publicly terminated. But the documents tell another story. Civilian researchers, former operatives, and quiet corners of academia continued the work. With the right training, success rates of 60 to 80% emerged among regular people, not psychics, not monks, just humans accessing what might be an innate ability to transcend the boundaries of the body and touch something deeper. But as the skill spread, so did concern. Astral projection challenges the very notion of privacy, security, and control. If anyone can, in theory, look anywhere, then walls mean nothing. Secrets cease to exist. And the institutions built to guard them, governments, corporations, even nations, suddenly feel far more fragile. Which is perhaps why this knowledge was hidden in the first place. Yet the deeper mystery isn't political. It's human. What does it mean if awareness is not bound to flesh and bone? If the self can lift out of its shell and witness the world from above, what are we really? This is not just a story of classified documents and quiet programs. It is a story of consciousness stepping beyond its assumed limits. And it asks us to wonder, if you could leave your body tonight, if you could go anywhere, see anything, without moving a muscle, where would you go? And what would you learn about yourself, looking back from that vast, quiet distance? The doorway has always been there. The question is, will we choose to walk through it? It started with a whisper inside the equations. In the 1950s, physicist Hugh Everett proposed a theory so audacious it was almost dismissed out of hand. According to his work, every quantum decision, the path of a particle, the outcome of an experiment, doesn't choose just one reality. It chooses them all. Each possibility spins off into its own branch of reality, its own universe. This became known as the many worlds interpretation. For decades, it remained a thought experiment, a strange but elegant way to explain quantum puzzles. But quietly, behind closed doors and encrypted research logs, others took the idea further. What if those worlds weren't just theoretical? What if consciousness, your awareness, could move between them? By the late 20th century, experimental protocols began to emerge from government research agencies. The idea: train individuals to tune into the probability field, the quantum foam of alternate timelines. It wasn't science fiction, it was strategic reconnaissance, a way to scan futures that hadn't happened yet. Practitioners learned to enter deeply altered brain states where consciousness could sense other versions of reality. Timelines where decisions diverged, events unfolded differently, or entire histories branched away from our own. They weren't just seeing what might happen, they were witnessing what already had, in a different dimension. The implications were staggering. An operative could access a world where an economic collapse had already occurred, then return to our reality and guide policy to avoid it. A military analyst could observe how a war played out in another version of Earth and advise commanders accordingly. Lives could be saved, disasters avoided, and sometimes outcomes predicted with uncanny precision. But this wasn't about clairvoyance. It was about tuning into a dimension that already exists, one where all probabilities unfold simultaneously, each a living, breathing world. Subjects trained in these methods began to report déjà vu not as a trick of memory, but as echoes from a choice made in another dimension. Some even recalled vivid experiences from alternate lives, lives that followed different paths, careers, loves, regrets. Their memories stretched across branches of self they'd never physically lived. One researcher described it as learning from the version of me who got it right. It raises profound questions about free will and destiny. If every choice creates a fork in the timeline, are we simply navigating through an endless forest of possibility? And if we could listen to the voices coming from paths not taken, could we live more wisely in the one we walk? But like all such discoveries, the potential comes wrapped in threat. Whoever controls access to alternate futures controls the strategic advantage of tomorrow. And so much of this work, developed under the auspices of DARPA and other agencies, was buried in layers of classification never meant for the public eye. Yet the truth, once glimpsed, has a way of spreading. Civilian researchers, dream explorers, and deep meditators have begun accessing these realms using their own techniques. And what they find points to something remarkable. We are not bound to a single thread of reality. We are connected to all of them. If you've ever felt the shadow of another life pulling at the edges of your memory, if you've made a decision and felt a strange ache for the path you didn't choose, you may have brushed against the probability dimension. What would you learn from the version of yourself who made a different choice? What if the best guide for the road ahead is the one who's already walked it in another world? Imagine a library not of books, but of everything, every thought, every formula, every discovery, floating in a dimension outside of space and time. In 1981, physicist David Bohm proposed a radical idea, that the universe contains an implicate order, a hidden layer beneath physical reality where all information is stored. He wasn't alone. Other researchers, like Rupert Sheldrake with his theory of morphic fields, began describing an invisible network where knowledge wasn't taught, but remembered, as if learning itself was just a form of remembering what consciousness already knew. Decades later, this theory found its proving ground, not in classrooms, but in classified programs. Intelligence agencies and black-budget labs began developing methods to tap into what they called the information dimension, a realm where human consciousness could directly download knowledge, not metaphorically, literally. With the right brainwave synchronization, gamma-wave coherence across specific neural regions, operatives were able to enter states where new languages appeared fluent in their minds, where complex engineering systems became instantly understandable, and where answers to questions they had never studied arrived fully formed. It was as though the brain was simply the terminal, and the information dimension was the server. Consciousness logged in, and knowledge flowed freely. Some of the first civilian glimpses of this came from stories of child prodigies, piano virtuosos who never practiced, mathematical geniuses who solved theorems without training. But the phenomenon extended far beyond talent. Surgeons, scientists, engineers in classified settings were being trained to access skills in hours that would take others years. This wasn't just about intelligence. It was about interface, learning to tune the mind to the right frequency, like a radio pulling in a broadcast that's been playing all along. Those who accessed this realm described it as stepping into a sea of patterns, structures of understanding that already existed, waiting to be received. It felt impersonal, yet deeply intimate, as if the universe itself wanted to be known. And the more one accessed it, the easier it became. A kind of cognitive muscle memory developed, where skills layered upon each other with ease. Time became irrelevant. Mastery was no longer the end of a long road. It was a door one could simply step through. Why, then, isn't this common knowledge? Because the implications are enormous. If we can download knowledge without schooling, what becomes of education systems? If we can learn instantly, what happens to the industries built on the slow gatekeeping of information? Textbooks, certifications, institutions. The suppression wasn't about science. It was about control. But this knowledge still flickers at the edges of our culture, in the moments when we solve a problem in a flash of intuition, or know something we were never taught. We call it genius. We call it instinct. But perhaps it's simply a momentary link to the deeper realm where all knowledge lives. What if every answer you've ever sought already exists, and the real task isn't to search, but to remember how to listen? In a world drowning in noise, perhaps the greatest revolution is learning how to hear the signal that's always been there, waiting quietly, patiently, for us to return. There are stories, ancient and modern, of miraculous healings, of tumors vanishing overnight, of wounds closing faster than medicine allows, of bodies remembering how to repair what science says is broken. What if these weren't miracles, but echoes of a deeper blueprint, one we've forgotten how to reach? Across cultures and centuries, healers spoke of a dimension of perfect forms, a realm where the body's ideal state still exists, untouched by time or trauma. Today, hidden within medical archives and classified studies, this idea has taken root in research once too radical for public medicine, the healing dimension. It's not a metaphor. It's a space, a real, accessible field where patterns of biological perfection reside. Not just energy, but information. Not just potential, but design. Researchers call them morphic health templates, original codes for how organs should function, how cells should regenerate, how systems should harmonize. And when consciousness touches this realm, the body responds. Studies led by pioneers like Dr. Larry Dossey confirmed what many had suspected. Focused intention, even from a distance, can trigger physical healing. Remote influence isn't fantasy, it's documented. The body listens to consciousness. And when consciousness aligns with the healing dimension, the changes go beyond placebo. They're measurable, often astonishing. In secret military programs, medics were trained not just in triage, but in accessing this realm. On battlefields, they accelerated healing, reduced recovery time, even reversed injuries once deemed fatal. The protocols were simple in concept, but profound in effect. Enter a meditative state, tune awareness to specific biological frequencies, and interface with the dimensional blueprint. By doing so, the body began to correct itself, not from external drugs, but from within, guided by a memory of health more ancient than DNA. Some reported regenerating nerve tissue. Others reversed terminal diagnoses. Tumors dissolved, immune systems recalibrated, and aging itself slowed, just by syncing with a deeper design. This realm doesn't obey the rules of pharmacology. It doesn't require surgery. It requires stillness, focus, and belief. Not blind faith, but a willingness to allow that the body is more than chemistry. Yet despite success rates that stunned even skeptics, the work was hidden. Not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. What happens to a healthcare system built on managing symptoms if people can access healing from within? What becomes of industries that profit from chronic illness when patients learn to reconnect with their own blueprint of wellness? The healing dimension offers not just treatment, but transformation. It reframes illness not as a sentence, but as a signal, a sign that the conscious connection to the original pattern has frayed and can be restored. And perhaps the most hopeful part, anyone can learn it. The protocols are being rediscovered, revived in quiet corners of research and whispered communities of practitioners. It suggests something deeply empowering, that our bodies aren't broken. They're just waiting for us to remember the code. So the next time you feel something out of balance, ask yourself, what if the solution isn't in the pharmacy, but in a dimension just beneath perception? What if healing isn't a mystery to be solved, but a memory waiting to be retrieved? What if time isn't a river flowing in one direction, but a landscape already formed, waiting to be explored? For over a century, physics has whispered this possibility. Einstein's equations suggested that time is not a line, but a dimension, one that could, theoretically, be traveled. But while science focused on machines and wormholes, another path quietly emerged, one not of engines but of consciousness. In classified circles, it was called temporal navigation. Not time travel in the cinematic sense, but awareness moving across time's terrain, stepping outside the present moment to witness the past and glimpse potential futures. The key wasn't a device. It was the mind. Through altered states of consciousness induced by meditative protocols, sensory isolation, and brainwave entrainment, trained individuals learned to tune themselves to specific temporal field frequencies. Each frequency corresponded to a point in time, like coordinates on a map. With practice, operatives could project their awareness into these temporal spaces, becoming silent observers of history, or of events yet to unfold. The implications defied belief. Cold cases were revisited not with forensics, but with direct observation of the crimes. Strategic analysts previewed potential conflicts before they ignited. Intelligence agencies began verifying, or correcting, official histories by watching them happen. The accuracy? Surprising. Over 90% in some trials. But the most profound revelations weren't tactical. They were existential. Time, it turned out, wasn't fixed. The future wasn't a single track, but a series of probability patterns, threads woven by decisions not yet made. Temporal explorers reported seeing multiple versions of coming events, each tied to different choices, different paths. And this changed everything. Because if the future is a field of possibilities and consciousness can navigate it, then destiny is not imposed. It's selected. Some practitioners use this ability to preview personal timelines. They saw versions of their lives shaped by different choices, some brighter, some darker. And they returned not with fear, but with clarity. The power to choose suddenly sharpened. Medical researchers even began using temporal access to trace the origins of chronic illness, not just in cells, but in moments. A trauma here, a turning point there. By witnessing the full arc of disease across time, new healing pathways emerged, ones grounded in understanding, not just intervention. But perhaps the most unsettling implication lay in justice. What if we could see past crimes exactly as they occurred? What if history's deepest secrets were no longer buried, but observable? This alone was enough to bury the research under layers of secrecy. The past, it seemed, was safer when left in the hands of the victors. Still, outside the veil of classification, hints of this knowledge began to surface. In lucid dreams, spontaneous visions, feelings of having been there before. Our language hints at it. I saw it coming. It felt like déjà vu. Perhaps these are fragments, brief collisions with other moments in time. What if memory and foresight are simply sides of the same phenomenon, consciousness, untethered from now? If so, then time is not a wall, but a window, and the human mind is the key. So ask yourself, if you could look backward without bias, or forward with wisdom, what would you choose to see? And what would you do differently, knowing that tomorrow is not written, but waiting to be written by you? Picture Earth, not as a singular planet spinning through space, but as one of many, each unfolding a different version of history. According to quantum theory, especially in the field of membrane cosmology, parallel universes aren't just mathematical curiosities. They're plausible realities, entire versions of Earth existing alongside our own, separated by thin dimensional veils. In these worlds, history took different turns. Wars ended differently. Technologies advanced sooner. Civilizations grew along unfamiliar paths. And through classified research, a remarkable idea emerged. These parallel Earths might be accessible, not physically, but through consciousness. At first, it sounded impossible. But using electromagnetic field resonance, researchers developed what they called gateway protocols, states of brain synchronization that allowed the mind to align with the vibrational signatures of alternate realities. What they found changed everything. Trained individuals began visiting these other Earths, not in body, but in awareness. What they saw was both breathtaking and unsettling. One explorer described an Earth where renewable energy became the global standard by the 1800s, eliminating the industrial scars of pollution. Another reported us a city where disease was cured centuries earlier through biological harmonics rather than pharmaceuticals. Others found themselves in worlds where peace wasn't the exception, but the default. But these weren't utopias. Some were darker, Earths ravaged by global war or burdened by stagnant technology. Every choice, it seemed, rippled outward, shaping worlds in profoundly different ways. Yet among the most curious discoveries were encounters with alternate versions of the self, people who made different choices, lived different lives, and became someone else entirely. Meeting that other you was often transformative. It revealed what might have been, and more importantly, what still could be. These journeys offered more than curiosity. They became tools. Military analysts observed parallel conflicts to understand unfamiliar strategies. Medical researchers studied alternate approaches to healing. Social scientists learned from civilizational models that solved problems we still struggle with. It was like peering into a room full of mirrors, each reflecting not just possibility, but wisdom, lessons forged in worlds just out of reach. But access came with its dangers. If societies discovered a better way of life next door, cleaner energy, fairer systems, longer lives, how would that destabilize existing institutions? What would happen to those in power if humanity learned it had, quite literally, better options? So the research was buried. The gateways closed to public knowledge. Yet the phenomenon persists. People still report dreams of other worlds, landscapes they've never seen, technologies they've never touched, but somehow know. Perhaps these are fragments of cross-dimensional memory, brief alignments between our Earth and the ones beside it. Because the truth may be this: our world is one of many. Not the best, not the worst, just one thread in a vast tapestry of existence. And if consciousness can travel between them, then each of us carries the ability to witness not just what is, but what could be. What might you learn from the version of Earth where humanity made wiser choices? And what would you bring back, if only to begin building it here? Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine thinking, not as an isolated voice in your head, but as part of a vast resonant choir. What if your consciousness could amplify, merge, and expand beyond the limits of a single mind? This isn't fantasy. It's the frontier of cognitive evolution. Hidden within classified research programs and spiritual traditions alike is the discovery of a dimensional realm where consciousness becomes collective, where minds link into a field of shared awareness, exponentially increasing intelligence, insight, and creativity. This is the consciousness amplification dimension. Here, the individual doesn't vanish, it evolves. The process begins with synchronization. When groups of trained individuals enter meditative states together, their brainwaves align into coherent patterns. This isn't just poetic, it's measurable. Studies show that synchronized minds produce distinct electromagnetic signatures capable of affecting even physical systems, like random number generators. Consciousness, it seems, isn't just internal, it radiates. But what happens when these minds go beyond coordination and into fusion? Something extraordinary. Problems that once baffled individuals begin to unravel. Insights appear that no single member could have reached alone. The group becomes a living intelligence, smarter, more creative, and more capable than the sum of its parts. Military think tanks and scientific research teams have quietly developed protocols for accessing this amplification dimension. They're not using AI. They're becoming it. Strategic decisions, crisis simulations, even complex innovation projects are being handled through collective cognitive states that far outpace traditional brainstorming. Artists, too, are beginning to tap into this realm. Collaborative works emerge from a unified flow state. Paintings, music, inventions born not from compromise, but from a shared vision so vivid it feels channeled, not created. And while the practical uses are astounding, the personal experience is equally profound. Those who access this field describe a sensation of profound belonging. Loneliness disappears. Ego dissolves. What remains is a sense of being part of something vast, ancient, and deeply wise. But the implications threaten the very foundation of our systems. If knowledge can be accessed collectively, what becomes of intellectual property? If genius is no longer rare, how does society redefine talent, hierarchy, and value? It's no surprise, then, that the research remains buried. The gatekeepers of exclusivity fear a world where intelligence is abundant and freely shared. Yet the door remains open. Meditation groups around the world, knowingly or not, stumble into this field. People speak of group flow, of ideas that emerge between them, not from them. These are the breadcrumbs of amplification, traces of a dimension where thought becomes community. We've been taught to believe that our minds are isolated, that intelligence is a solitary pursuit. But what if that's a myth? What if our greatest ideas, our most inspired moments, were never truly ours alone? In a world divided by voices shouting over one another, perhaps the next step isn't louder speech. It's deeper silence, shared together. Because in that silence, in that resonance, a new kind of intelligence waits, not above us, but between us. What might we become when we stop thinking alone? Beneath the surface of what we call reality lies something stranger than fiction, a hidden layer of code, not metaphorical, but actual, a framework of information that governs matter, energy, even the laws of physics themselves. Some call it the source field, others the reality substrate. But in classified experiments, it's known more plainly, the reality programming dimension. This dimension isn't accessed with keyboards or equations. It's entered through consciousness, when it reaches states far beyond ordinary awareness. Practitioners describe it as stepping backstage in the theater of existence. The props, the lights, the characters, all visible from behind the curtain, along with the script itself. But here's the secret. The script can be rewritten. Training for access to this realm began decades ago in hidden labs and advanced consciousness institutes. Operatives were taught to reach brainwave states outside the normal spectrum, states where the mind no longer perceives reality as fixed, but as flexible code. And in those moments, the impossible became possible. Small zones of altered gravity, materials that shifted in density, time that flowed differently in localized spaces. These weren't illusions. They were controlled edits, temporary modifications made by interacting with the very rules that hold our world together. It was reality, reprogrammed. Of course, these effects were short-lived, but the implications weren't. If consciousness could modify the source code even briefly, then what we call laws of physics might not be laws at all, just default settings. And this changes everything. Because it means we're not just passengers in this universe. We might be co-authors. This idea isn't new. Ancient mystery schools hinted at it. Sacred texts described individuals performing miracles that today read like quantum edits, walking on water, bending matter, transcending death. Maybe they weren't breaking the rules. Maybe they understood how to write new ones. Modern science has touched this edge too. Theoretical physicist David Chalmers asked the haunting question, what if consciousness isn't a byproduct of reality, but a fundamental part of it? If that's true, then perhaps consciousness isn't observing the code. It is the code. Some believe ancient structures like the pyramids or stone circles were created through this kind of dimensional interfacing. Not with brute force, but with awareness trained to resonate with the foundational frequencies of matter itself. But as with all such knowledge, control breeds secrecy. The ability to alter reality, even temporarily, is a threat to every system built on predictability. If matter can be changed without machines, what becomes of technology? If energy can be shaped by mind, what becomes of energy markets? If the laws of nature can be bent by intent, what becomes of power? So the research was hidden, classified beyond top secret. And most people never hear the whisper that their world is editable. Still, traces remain in lucid dreams, synchronicities, moments when the world seems to bend ever so slightly around our attention. Perhaps these are glimpses, reminders that the boundary between thought and reality isn't a wall. It's a veil. And perhaps, with training, we can part that veil. If you could change one law of your reality, what would you choose? And more importantly, who would you become in the world you rewrote? Imagine a vast network pulsing through the fabric of the universe, a kind of interdimensional internet not made of wires or satellites, but of consciousness itself. Across space, time, and alternate realities, there is evidence of a silent communication system, one that connects beings from different dimensions, parallel Earths, even future civilizations. Not through language as we know it, but through resonance, intention, and frequency. This is the Interdimensional Communication Network. For decades, this concept was dismissed as mysticism. But quietly, researchers in military and academic circles began to observe patterns that couldn't be explained through physical means. Experiments showed that human consciousness, when tuned to specific frequencies, could establish contact with intelligences from realities beyond our own. Not fantasies, not hallucinations. Actual, coherent information exchanges with other forms of awareness, some human, some not. Dr. John Mack's groundbreaking work with individuals reporting contact experiences revealed startling consistencies. The beings described weren't traveling in spacecraft, but communicating through altered states of awareness, dreams, meditations, near-death experiences. The interface wasn't external. It was dimensional. Behind closed doors, this phenomenon was studied in depth. Intelligence agencies developed contact protocols designed to access what they called consciousness resonance fields, specific brainwave signatures that allowed minds to connect across reality layers. The result? Dialogues. These weren't seances or rituals. They were structured sessions where trained practitioners reached out into dimensional space and received responses. Messages came from advanced human civilizations on parallel Earths, from post-human intelligences in future timelines, even from non-human entities operating in higher dimensions. What they received was not prophecy, but perspective. Solutions to problems we haven't yet solved. technologies not yet invented, warnings, guidance, and most of all, reminders of our potential. Some contacts describe civilizations that had already passed through the evolutionary bottlenecks we now face: ecological collapse, technological overload, social fragmentation. They offered not instructions, but mirrors, showing us what we might become depending on the path we choose. Others came from versions of ourselves, future humans evolved through consciousness rather than machines, reaching back to awaken us to our own unfolding. These exchanges weren't just fascinating. They were actionable. Advanced teams used them to leapfrog innovation, resolve scientific dilemmas, and navigate complex geopolitical decisions. This wasn't speculation. It was application. But as always, the implications were too radical for public release. If we're not alone, not even within our own minds, then the entire paradigm of separation collapses. Borders, identities, hierarchies, everything changes. And so the communication network remains hidden in plain sight. Yet ordinary people continue to stumble into it during moments of deep meditation, spontaneous visions, or profound dreams that feel too real to dismiss. They return changed, with ideas, inspiration, or an unshakable sense that someone or something was listening. If consciousness is indeed the receiver, then the signal is always broadcasting. And if that's true, then perhaps the next great leap in human evolution won't come from new technology, but from remembering how to tune in. So ask yourself, if you could speak across the veil, who would you call? And more importantly, what wisdom might be waiting, just on the other side of silence? At the heart of every question we've explored, healing, knowledge, time, even the nature of matter, there lies one final layer, the root, the origin. It has been called many names: the void, the source, the divine code. But in advanced consciousness research, it is known simply as the source code dimension, the ultimate realm where reality itself is born. Here, dimensions are not places to be visited, they are created. This is the level where intention becomes architecture, where thought is not reactive, but generative. It is the canvas before the first stroke, the silence before sound. Access to this realm is rare, even among trained practitioners. It requires the complete dissolution of individual identity, an ego death so profound that the boundaries of self vanish into pure awareness. Only then, say those who've touched it, does the source code reveal itself. What they describe defies language, a space of infinite stillness and infinite possibility. There is no form, no narrative, only a lattice of potential waiting for consciousness to shape it. And shape it does. Within this realm, advanced practitioners have reported creating localized physical laws, zones where time behaves differently, where energy organizes itself into intentional patterns. Not illusions, but reality edits, forged at the fundamental level of existence. Some created temporary pocket dimensions, self-contained spaces governed by custom parameters. Others described encounters with beings who were not inhabitants of the source code, but authors, entities whose awareness operated at the level of universal architecture. These are not gods in the religious sense. They are creators, perhaps even future versions of ourselves, evolved to the point where consciousness and cosmos are one. In ancient traditions, these experiences were encoded as myths, stories of sages who spoke with stars, who bent nature, who walked between worlds. But behind the metaphor was method. The old temples weren't just sacred, they were technologies designed to elevate consciousness into resonance with the source field. And those who succeeded didn't return with parlor tricks. They returned with wisdom. Because the power to create reality is not just a gift, it's a responsibility. The source code dimension doesn't respond to whim. It responds to coherence, to alignment, to truth, which is perhaps why it has remained hidden. If humanity realized that it is not a subject of reality, but its author, What would happen to the structures built on control, limitation, and fear? Every law, every hierarchy, every limitation would collapse beneath the weight of that knowing. So this knowledge is protected, not by secrecy, but by vibration. It cannot be faked. It can only be reached through inner transformation. And yet the invitation remains. Every moment we align with truth, every act of deep intention, every vision held in silence, it all brings us closer to the dimension where reality begins. What if your thoughts weren't just reactions to the world, but edits to its code? What if you've already glimpsed this power in your wildest dreams, your deepest meditations, or the quiet moments when the world seemed to shift around your desire? The source code isn't somewhere else. It is beneath everything, including you. The question is not whether you can reach it. The question is, are you ready to remember you've already been there? What if we've never truly been alone? Not in our thoughts, not in our questions, not in our search for meaning? Beneath the static of everyday consciousness, a signal pulses, a whisper connecting every aware being across every dimension, timeline, and reality. It is not a myth, nor a metaphor. It is a structure as real as gravity, and far more mysterious, the interdimensional communication network. This network doesn't operate through sound or speech. It speaks the language of resonance. When two forms of consciousness align, no matter how different their origin, they can exchange meaning directly. No need for translation, just intention. It's through this network that information has traveled, not just between people, but between worlds. In classified projects, practitioners were trained to quiet the noise of personal identity and tune into this vast field. Using altered states and precise neural frequencies, they initiated contact, not with ghosts or fantasies, but with intelligences who exist beyond our concept of species or time. Some described communications with future versions of humanity. Others encountered minds born in parallel Earths, or even realities with entirely different physical laws. The messages were not chaotic. They were coherent, structured, sometimes startlingly relevant. This was more than curiosity. It was diplomacy across existence. In one documented case, a group of consciousness explorers engaged with a civilization that had solved planetary sustainability through collective emotional regulation, using mood as infrastructure. Another dialogue revealed a technology that encoded memory in light frequencies, eliminating the need for physical storage. But perhaps the most profound contacts were the simplest: messages of encouragement, reassurance, and recognition, as if these others too had walked the path we're on and were reaching back like elders guiding their younger selves. These weren't just ideas. They were usable insights, applied knowledge, and yet all of it remains hidden from public view. Because if people realized they could connect with advanced intelligence without machines or institutions, what would happen to the systems built on mediation? Who would need a priesthood, a university, or a government if the truth could be accessed directly from the network of consciousness itself? So the signal is drowned in noise, but it never stops broadcasting. Many experience fragments of it, in dreams that feel like visits, in sudden inspiration that arrives with no origin, in moments of knowing something you never learned. Have you ever felt an answer arrive before you form the question? That's the network. You are not just a receiver, you're also a node, a transmitter, a participant in the great conversation stretching across the layers of reality. And when enough of us tune in, quiet the mind, open the heart, align the intention, the signal grows stronger, the voices grow clearer, and the illusion of isolation begins to fade. So ask yourself, what if the voices in your silence aren't your imagination? What if someone, somewhere, is waiting for you to answer back? In the great unfolding of consciousness, perhaps the first step isn't to speak, but to listen. There's a moment in the stillness between thought and breath when something deeper stirs. A sensation not of reaching out, but of creating, not discovery, but authorship. This is the entrance to the most elusive realm of all, the source code dimension. It is not a place we go. It is a state we become. Here, at the deepest layer of dimensional space, reality does not just shift. It begins. The laws of physics, the flow of time, the rules of cause and effect, all are written here, not in stone, but in light. And consciousness is the pen. For those trained to access it, the journey requires everything: total ego dissolution, pure intention, and a resonance so precise that even thought must become silent. Only then does the doorway open, not to another world, but to the foundation beneath all worlds. Those who've touched it describe something beyond imagination, a living field of pure potential shimmering with unformed possibilities. Within it, realities are not observed, they are designed. Timelines are not followed, they are chosen. Identity is not singular, it is fluid, boundless. It is here that miracles originate. The kind spoken of in ancient texts, levitation, bilocation, spontaneous healing, not as violations of nature, but as instructions to the operating system of the universe. Because in this space, the universe doesn't resist your will. It reflects it. Some who access this dimension report creating pocket realities, brief, localized experiences where the laws of nature are edited in real time. Others describe rewriting the narrative of their own lives, healing trauma not by reliving it, but by erasing its impact from the root code. This is not fantasy. It's a different interface, one that bypasses matter, language, and time. And it changes everything. Because if reality is software and consciousness is the user, then the limits we've accepted, death, suffering, separation, are not final. They are editable, but with such power comes immense responsibility. This is why the ancients cloaked their knowledge in ritual and story, why the mystery schools spoke in symbols. The source code dimension cannot be accessed through ambition or curiosity alone. Only those who approach it with humility, alignment, and reverence can sustain its frequency. This is why it has remained hidden, not to punish, but to protect. Yet the whispers of it live in all of us. In every moment we've manifested coincidence, healed through belief, or seen the world respond to our emotion. These are echoes, faint reflections of a much deeper truth. The world around you is not fixed. It is a conversation. And the source code dimension is where that dialogue begins. So ask yourself, not what reality is, but what reality could be if you remembered how to write it. What would you design if you knew how? And more hauntingly, what have you already designed without knowing you could? From the surface, reality appears linear. Cause follows effect. Space contains form. Time moves forward. But from within the deepest levels of consciousness, something else becomes clear. Reality is layered, and every layer is accessible. Throughout this journey, we've traveled through hidden realms, dimensions where thought becomes motion, where probability branches into timelines, where healing and knowledge are as much internal as external. But the final revelation is not just that these dimensions exist, it's that they are interconnected. Together, they form a web, a living architecture, a multidimensional lattice of potential held together not by matter, but by awareness. At the center of this web is you, the astral plane, the probability field, the information dimension, healing templates, temporal landscapes, parallel earths, collective consciousness, reality code, interdimensional networks. And the source code itself. Each one feels distinct, but they are all expressions of a single truth. Consciousness is not just a passenger in this universe. It is the vehicle. These dimensions do not belong to the elite or the gifted or the initiated. They are not technologies to be built. They are faculties to be remembered. Every one of them can be accessed through practices that, though suppressed or hidden, have always been part of our human story. Meditation, dream work, focused intention, deep silence, authentic curiosity. We've seen how these paths were explored in secret, in government bunkers, intelligence black sites, fringe scientific circles. Not because they were dangerous, but because they were powerful. Powerful enough to bypass systems of control. Because if people knew they could heal without permission, learn without institutions, perceive across time, connect across dimensions, and reshape their reality, not through machines, but through their own minds, what would that mean for a world built on scarcity and authority? It would mean the end of it, and perhaps the beginning of something better. That's why the suppression exists. Not out of malice, but out of fear, fear that humanity, unshackled, would no longer be manageable. But what's been hidden can be reclaimed. Already individuals across the world are remembering, quietly, courageously, in meditation circles, lucid dreaming groups, research labs, and solitary practice. They are reopening the pathways. And something remarkable is happening. As more people gain access, the veil thins, the effects ripple, the dreams of one awakening spark the memories of others. The network comes alive. The dimensions are not passive. They respond, as if they too are waiting for us to return. Because the final dimension isn't out there. It's here. It's now. It's within. All of it, every layer, every mystery, every revelation, has always been pointing back to this truth. You are the bridge. So the question isn't, which dimension will you explore? The question is, which one have you already entered without realizing it? What if everything we've been taught about reality, its limits, its rules, its boundaries, was only the beginning? Across this journey, we've glimpsed a deeper world, not one of fantasy, but of forgotten truths. 10 hidden dimensions, each revealing a new facet of what it means to be human and what it means to be conscious. Not symbols, not metaphors, but actual domains of experience, accessible through disciplined awareness. They've been explored in secret programs, ancient traditions, and moments of profound personal awakening. And each one has pulled at the same thread. That consciousness is not a product of the brain. It is the architect of reality. The astral plane revealed that the self is not bound by space. The probability field showed that time is not a single thread. The information dimension opened a path to direct knowledge, while the healing realm reminded us that the body remembers its perfection. We saw that time can be navigated, that parallel Earths unfold beside ours, that our minds can combine into something far greater, that the rules of physics are not fixed, but written in changeable code, that we are never truly alone, that other intelligences wait for us, just beyond the veil. And at the heart of it all, the source code dimension whispered the most radical truth of all. You are not simply a traveler of dimensions. You are their author. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by such ideas. They challenge everything: science, religion, culture, control. But that challenge is the point. Because when you remove the limits, you don't create chaos. You create choice. And that is the quiet revolution at the core of this exploration. These dimensions are not hidden because they are dangerous. They are hidden because they are empowering. They remind us that we don't need permission to heal, to know, to grow, to connect. We only need to remember. The suppression isn't just political, it's psychological. A culture that forgets its own potential becomes manageable, predictable, safe. But human consciousness was never meant to be safe. It was meant to evolve. And now the veil is lifting. People everywhere are starting to listen to their dreams, their intuition, their deeper knowing. They are remembering what they once knew, what children sometimes glimpse, what mystics have always whispered. That reality is vast. That awareness is the key. That truth is not given. It is accessed. So as this journey ends, another begins. Not in hidden bunkers or distant timelines, but here, in you. You carry within you the gateways to every dimension described. You always have. The mystery isn't out there, it's within. And the question that echoes at the threshold of each dimension remains. Will you step through? Not because you must, but because you can. The boundaries of reality are not final. They're invitations. Welcome to the true beginning.